Well, good morning and happy Monday to everyone. And welcome to another episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. And today we have a really amazing story for you guys with a very great, awesome guest. And she has a story that will blow you guys' mind, very inspiring from the bottom all the way back up to the top again, and shows how good life can be when you have faith. Now, without further ado, or before we get started, I would like to let you know that this is for entertainment purposes only. So if this is your first time tuning in, do me a favor. Head over to that YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, we are streaming live on all platforms. So if you have any questions or comments, please put those in the comment section. We'll be happy to answer those as we go. Now, like I said before, I'm going to bring up my guests. And you guys sit back, enjoy, and please be respectful. Let's get this thing going. So my guest today, Holly Bot, she is here. Good morning, Holly, and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I've been looking forward to this. So before we get started, tell people who you are and where you're from.
Well, my name is Holly Bot, and I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Awesome. Now, how's the weather out there today? Or how's the weather been out there?
Well, it has been a very warm weather, which I love. I can't complain about that at all. But then it had to snow last week. So now it's a real winter. It's cold. It's 10 degrees, and it's normal now. So
we have to start defining what's normal in this world today, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because oh my God, so many different things are going on. Now we talked before, and I tell you, man, after that conversation, I was just like, wow, man, I was blown away from where you come from to where you are today. It's such a true, amazing, inspiring story, and you're the true definition of faith, like what does it take to get to where you are? Now, before we get to that, let's talk about your journey.
Okay. Well, I'll start with a little bit about before prison. And I grew up in I would say an ordinary family. I know my experience isn't everyone's experience, but I had nice parents and a nice family, and they did a good job raising me. And so, all of the rest of that, I certainly can't say, well, I had this bad experience and that's what caused all the rest. When I was 18, I kind of acted out, I guess. I always wanted to be a good girl. I wanted to please my parents, and I wanted to be accepted, and I really felt, I don't know, that I wasn't getting that, and I was going to get attention one way or another, and so I ran off to Vegas and got married. Probably not the best idea, and it didn't last very long. It lasted less than a year, but I did get pregnant, and so my first son is from that marriage. And so as a single mom, I worked hard and, wanted to do it right the next time, do a better job getting married. And because that really, it got me attention, but it just caused more disappointment. I became, maybe this is just me. I've certainly never had anyone in my family tell me this, but I just got this feeling that I was the black sheep. I'm the person who would do something so crazy that I would run off to Vegas and get married. And so I wanted to, shine and do well. So at age 23, I got married again, and we had 4 more children. So I have 5. And as I told you before, I told my second husband, I want to have 5 kids total. And for me, I'm going to be honest, that was probably loneliness on my part. I grew up with just one brother. I was always begging my mom have more kids. She said no. And so I thought, well, I'm going to solve that. I'm just going to have a bunch myself. And my second husband, he told me later, he thought to himself, yeah, I know she says that, but I only want to have 3 and we'll work that out later. And when he did tell me later, I was like, well, I hope you'll love the last 2 like they're your own, because I'm having 5. And we did, we had 5. But that marriage wasn't much better than the second, other than it lasted longer. It was hard. It was a hard marriage. We were poor, and it was pretty loveless. And so after about 12 years of marriage, we were really, really struggling. And I'm not going to say either one of us was good or bad. It's not about who's doing right or who's doing wrong, or about assessing blame. I can tell you, and I will speak for myself, that I had become very bitter, and I was still an attention seeker. I really wanted approval. And so I had decided, and I was a work-at-home mom, so I had decided, in order to get this, my goal, and I'm not saying that this was something I thought in my mind, but I can see this now looking back, that I was going to highlight my own success, or anything I could make look like a success, and just shout that from the rooftops, and really try to find success wherever I could, so I'd have something to shout from the rooftops. At the same time, I was going to point out every flaw I could think of in my husband to everyone that I knew. And I was going to magnify even the smallest mistakes that he made to everyone. I wanted everyone else to hate him as much as I did, because the more I felt unloved, the more I hated him. And the more I wanted everyone else to feel as rejected as I was beginning to feel, as unloved as I was beginning to feel. I wanted him to feel unloved. And I wanted the whole world to participate in it, right? And it just grew into this, I don't even know how to explain it. It was like the atomic bomb mushrooming out like this. And so that was really the playing field before I went to prison. That's what my life looked like at that time. But from the outside, I tried to make it look like everything's fine. I suffered from Great Depression. It takes a lot of energy to keep something like that going. Right? Being superwoman, trying to appear super successful, trying to do things that always seem to be praiseworthy. At the same time, paying attention to someone else constantly, so that you can always be on the lookout for whatever it is they're doing wrong, so that you don't miss it. You can make sure to point it out to everybody else. That takes so much energy. It was exhausting. And so I wore myself out to depression, because it didn't work. It just didn't work. And the more it didn't work, the more depressed I became, the more unfulfilled and discouraged I became. And so ultimately, I believe that that's what really led to a complete meltdown. I wanted to divorce my husband. And I've heard many women say, I just didn't think I could afford to, leave. I would have wanted to take my children with. Or another fear of mine was, this would be my second divorce, and my parents were religious. I feared it, well, and they were, I want to say, overbearing. Maybe that's not completely accurate. That was my perception at the time. We'll say that. And so I feared that if I did leave, they might make me go back. Now, I know I was a person in my 30s, but it still seemed like that could be a thing. And I was so worn out from all of my activities that how could I even bear up under the slightest pressure from someone else? And so I didn't even want to think about that. So those were my thoughts and concerns, and why, those are excuses, because some things I didn't do was seek counseling in a very direct way. There's lots of things I could have done to help myself that I didn't do, but these were thoughts and things that were going through my head that kept me feeling trapped in my situation. And so after about a year of this, I would say my thoughts were not necessarily suicidal, but they were life-altering, life-ending type thoughts. They were catastrophic type. How do I fix things? I'm in disaster mode type thinking.
Right.
And my oldest son was 15. My children ranged from 15 down to age. My daughter was 3. I have 4 boys and 1 girl. My daughter's the youngest, and I didn't keep going 4 boys until I finally had a girl. Some people ask me that, but no, I just wanted 5, and thankfully I had a girl. Anyways, my oldest son was 15, and he had a friend who from school whose parents had told him, or his dad actually, his mom wasn't in the picture, that he couldn't afford him anymore and might have to put him in foster care. And so despite the difficult situation that we were in with me and my husband, with our relationship and things, we did feel sorry for this kid. So we tried to be more involved, providing groceries or just whatever we could think of. So this kid was around more often because of that. And subsequently, and there's a lot of other things going on that I won't go into, but subsequently I ended up having a sexual relationship with my son's friend. And a lot of people have asked me why, or they think they know why things like that happen. For me, I wasn't interested in a relationship or a sexual relationship with him any more than I was with my own husband, and we'd had separate bedrooms for over a year. I mean, I don't mean to make light of things, but this is a real reality that when you have 5 kids and they're in school and they have activities, it's go here, drive here, activity here, and I'm working here. And the thought that you're going to come home and there's somebody in your room who has another activity planned after all the kids are in bed, it's just a nightmare, And so this was no different. Somebody else wanting another activity planned. But what I did want is to destroy my life. I wanted people to give up on me. And about this time, there was some teacher who was in the news, not in Minnesota, but I don't even remember where she was. It's a long time ago. But she had a relationship with a student and had gone to jail. And so that was in the news. And so I knew that this was illegal, but I also knew that, you know what? I bet if I committed a crime, everyone would give up on me. My parents wouldn't make me go back to this relationship because they would just be like, she's beyond hope. And my husband wouldn't want me anymore. It just almost like committing suicide, right? But I'm not dead. And this kid came to me, and again, not blaming him, but came to me interested in a relationship. And it was a split second decision, maybe not more than 5 seconds, but less than that, of yeah, I had been contemplating ruining my life through divorce or who knows what else. In fact, I had been slowly melting down my life for over a year. And then this seemed like a radically impulsive way to utterly kill myself without being dead. And so that's what I did. I said yes. After that, I regretted it and wanted my life back. It's like after that moment, you recognize or you begin to realize the consequences of what you just did, and that you really have just killed your life. You killed yourself. You really killed your identity, and everything is gone. But there's that grace period. I think of like the nuclear bomb has gone off, but the fallout hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
but it's been dropped and you can't take it back. And so you have how many seconds to think about what a mistake that was and to be so sorry. And then to think of all the ways that just are impossible. How can I make it go back? Right? But you can't.
Right.
And so that scrambling desperation of, man, I screwed up. And so I lived in that limbo for a brief period of time where I couldn't tell on myself, but I knew it was all about to fall.
Right.
And my husband confronted me. He figured things out. And so I did tell him what happened. And so as because of that, then he's like, well, obviously you have to go tell this kid it's never going to happen again. And so that's what I did and went and talked to him. And this kid said, well, if that's how it's going to be, because I know, your relationship with your husband is bad. So I don't know what's going on here. If I can't have you, then I'm just going to go kill myself.
Mm.
And so you can't put something back in a bottle. You can't just tidy it up and go on your way. Once you've done something, all sorts of people are going to behave and they're going to do what they do, right? And so it just unravels, and it just began to unravel. So we took him to the hospital because you don't play games. You never know why people are saying what they're saying. So we took him to the hospital, the emergency room. And I told him along the way, I said, just so you know, when we get there, I'm going to tell them everything that happened, right? So it's not on you, but I mean, you can. I'm telling you this, saying this to my victim. I'm telling you this so that you know that you can say anything you want to say, and you're free from worry that it will get me in trouble or anything. You don't have to worry about anything because I'm going to be saying it first. So we got to the hospital and they put him in a room like you do in the ER. And then we were waiting in the hall, and some nursing staff came to talk to us and ask us, why are you here and what's going on? And my husband kind of sat next to me very mute. I'm sure he was in shock and just really upset, right? And so he didn't say much. And so it was on me to explain why we're there. And I am just crying, and I did not yet have a full understanding of, I mean, I was in shock too. When you commit a crime or even just harm against someone else, even if it's not illegal, in addition to traumatizing that person and other people who might be a witness or affected by it, you also traumatize yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're a victim of your own trauma, your own behavior, right? And so I was in shock as well and traumatized. And so I'm trying to explain to this lady, and I'm crying, but I think that shock limited my ability to fully understand what's happening here. But I did have some understanding that this is not good, and they're not going to have any sort of, even though I'm crying my eyes out, no one's going to like me, and no one's going to feel sorry for me, right? They're going to hate me. I'm a bad person, and they're going to be very angry with me. Well, this nurse, she kneeled down in front of me. I was sitting in a chair, and she's listening with a concerned expression like you would expect a nurse to be like. She's listening hard. And the more that I'm talking, the more that I'm crying. And I'm expecting any minute she is going to get like an angry face and start, comprehension's going to dawn over what I'm telling her, and she's going to start to see me as and be angry with me. But instead, the more I cried, she put her hand on my leg, and she was very compassionate to me, and she was nice to me. And I just can't tell you how meaningful that was to me at the time, because I have learned since then, and all the time that I've spent in prison, and all the other people that I have met who have committed crimes, and wherever they are at in their stage of healing and personal growth, that people don't begin to even want to heal and move forward unless they feel that it's worth it.
Yes.
That there is someone who cares, that there is a life worth living, and that there are people waiting for them on the other side, right? And so that nurse at that time was a glimpse for me that that's possible, right? That there are people on the other side. And that was really helpful. And so a couple days later, the police came to talk, and it took a while because my victim didn't want to really say anything, right? So it was just my own, me testifying against myself. And I don't want to belabor the criminal justice system and how well it works or doesn't work. That's a conversation for maybe another day. But
I definitely understand that part,
yeah, I will tell you that, I was sentenced eventually. It took a year from that moment until I was sentenced, almost exactly a year. And then I was sentenced to 12 years in prison. And in Minnesota at that time, you served 8 years of your sentence. And I think of this as a game. One game that's often played, it's not an official game, I'll tell you it's played by a lot of people, is get the newspaper and then see who's been charged with what. Compare that to your own crime and then be angry or delighted based on the results. What? He killed somebody and only got 3 years. How is that fair? I did such and such and I got 10. Or, right? So I played that game for quite a long time, just trying to, everybody wants to understand how the world works, and I was no different. And so after I got to prison, I was there about 6 months, and I thought, before things really started to get worse, because I thought when I got to prison, that was the worst that life can ever get. And I'm not the only person who thinks that way. I remember being in prison and other women would show up and go, man, my life has hit rock bottom. And by the time I had been there 8 years, when I met women newly arrived to prison and they said that, I'd be like, nuh-uh.
Like, you have no idea.
Wait, your life is going to get so much worse. This is your best day today. Today is your best day. But I didn't want to scare them, but that's what I knew to be true. So I had a terrible phone call from my parents, who were raising my children once I went to prison, because my husband had just become unstable. And I don't want to criticize him for that either, because I have explained already that I certainly played a strong part. I was certainly not someone who built him up in any way. He's responsible for his own behavior and actions, but I certainly was no help at all for him in that. And I had promised to be a partner for him in that. And so, well, what I'm about to describe is, or explain, are things that he did that none of us may like. And my own behavior too. I just want to make sure it's understood that he's not a villain in the story, and I have my own part in that. So he had struggled while I was out on bail, and so eventually I'd had to get a restraining order, and against him, and he was only allowed supervised visits with the kids. So my parents had my kids, and when I was in prison about 6 months, he came to my parents' house and threatened to kill everybody and kidnap my kids and took them 3,000 miles away to Washington State. And I cannot tell you what that was like for me, because I thought, I'm in prison. My parents only live 15 minutes away. I'm going to see the kids all the time. We're going to get through this. My parents will raise my kids the way that I would. They're going to be safe. It's going to be fine. And instead, this nightmare is unfolding. My husband threatens to kill everyone, wishes he could kill me, and kidnaps my kids. They called the police. The police didn't arrive in time, and they're gone. And, the police asked me, because I called them too, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to stop him? We'll take the kids, but we'll put them in foster care, whatever state we find him in, that's where they'll go in foster care, or we can just let him go. And I said, just let him go. I don't want my kids in foster care in Montana or something, because they said we won't bring them back. Wherever they are, that's where they're going to stay. And so I said, let him go. And if I guess I don't know, if I had known the future, I probably would have said, stop him. Because it wouldn't be too much longer before I was getting a call saying that my youngest son was in the hospital receiving life-saving surgery because of my husband for abuse. And my youngest son would never go home again. It'd be the last time that he was at home with my husband. And that was the beginning of the unraveling, right? My youngest son would eventually go through over 30 foster homes and group homes, which he would describe to me the times I was able to talk to him as also abusive. My husband, fearing that social services might take the other children away, I don't know what he was thinking, but I'm told that's what he might have been thinking, gave our daughter away. He had been having affairs out there with other women, and one of those women didn't have any children, and so he said, I'm going to work. I can't afford daycare. This thing happened with my son. Maybe they'll come take the other kids. Do you want my daughter? And away was given my daughter. I haven't seen her since. Haven't talked to her since. And so then all that was left at home was the two older boys. And when my oldest son with him, Lucas, turned 17, my husband, who was just becoming increasingly unraveled through drugs and alcohol and what have you, and more restraining orders were being brought against him by other women out there due to violence with guns and other things, just becoming unhinged, kicked Lucas out. And so I remember a family took Lucas in and encouraged him to finish high school. And my parents came out to Lucas's graduation from high school and were just shocked at how emaciated my son Lucas looked, how malnourished he looked. And Lucas was staying with another family at this point, but he was so depressed that he wasn't eating, and he looked scary skinny. So my parents encouraged Lucas to come back to Minnesota with them and live with him, and Lucas was the first of my sons to return. Eventually, all of my sons would return to Minnesota, but Lucas was the first. My oldest son stayed with my parents, my son from my first marriage, and always has been here. But Lucas was the first of my younger four to come back. It's interesting because when I was getting ready to leave prison, Lucas had been back in Minnesota for about a year, and he was living with my parents. And he got into a difficult relationship with a woman that was full of conflict. I can't be surprised about that there, but it ended up in a lot of phone calls to the police and my son being arrested for domestic violence.
Oh, wow.
And my husband had spent a lot of time preaching against the kids about what a terrible person I was. And my children loved me, but there was this then dynamic of how do we reconcile? We love mom, but dad says these things, right? So I'm not sure how that was for them. But when Lucas was arrested, he ended up in the same jail I had been in, the same jail. And so, I think when something like that happens once, you can excuse it. That was a fluke, right? If you think that you're better than someone else or that they are other. I mean, mom's obviously terrible. She's in prison. Oh no, I ended up in the same jail. Well, that's just a mistake. It wasn't me. 3 months later, he was arrested again. Ended up in the same jail. And now I was about to be released from prison, and it was likely I would be visiting him in jail instead of him visiting me in prison. And things had really changed. And Lucas really started to understand how people get into things like this, how things happened. It really humanized the whole situation for him with me. Not that he didn't love me, but it gave him the ability to understand so that he could be receptive. Because when I left prison, I moved into my parents' house with Lucas.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
And while that was such a joy for me, because I had gone to prison and had 5 children that I lived with, and I really missed my kids. And I thought I would never get to live with them again because they'd be all adults when I got out of prison. But here I am, I get to live with Lucas, right? He's an adult, but I can still mother him. Anyways, I worried what that would be like. Would he be angry? Because here he suffered horrible abuse because I went to prison. He was kicked out. He suffered depression, all of this suffering really because of me, my fault. And now I'm living down the hall from him. How will that go? But because of his own situation, it had opened up the way for a conversation between him and me. And it allowed him to be open and receptive, right? And even forgiving. It allowed him to be forgiving. And so I'm so grateful for that. I'll tell a funny story. Because of his jail time, he was then placed on probation in the same county, of course. And so then when I got out of prison, my son taught me how to be on probation.
I love how the roles got reversed there. Right now, you can't go out and do this. No, you can't do that. But this is what you have to do, right?
Well, and even though neither one of us had ever had a drug or alcohol problem, in our county, it was mandatory that you have random drug and alcohol tests, random. But since we both lived in the same house and had the same last name with first names just a few letters apart, our random time was always called on the same day. So we'd call in the morning this number and be like, oh, it's today. And Luke be like, yeah, me too. And be like, hey, can you give me a ride? And so we both show up to the drug testing place together, like, we're here. And they just couldn't figure me out at the drug testing place because everyone else there is like all sitting low in their chair and they got their hats and they're like not happy to be there. And they had like this table up front for like sign in for the drug test, and there's 2 people there, and I'd be all like, hey, this is my son, I'm so proud of him, isn't he great? And they're like, this never happens. Mom and son have showed up for matching drug tests, and mom's like showing off her son like she's so proud of him.
Now, I have to ask, did he ever say anything? Did he ever look and go, y'all, okay, mother and son, right? Because and the reason why I asked that, because in a lot of cases, right, and coming from prison myself, they said you can't be around other felons, right? But you guys live in the same household, and your mother and son. Did they ever say anything to you? No?
No.
Okay.
No, they never did. However, I was really fortunate, and I'll back up a little bit. I'm not sure if this relates or not to, I mean, I know that in family situations often, and it's county by county and probation officer by probation officer, they really decide what they want to do. However, I think what helped for me is, I'll back up a little bit in my story. So in prison, when I first arrived and all through many of the beginning years there, I just couldn't figure out how life had gone so wrong, right? I am a high achiever, very ambitious, and I wanted a good family, loving relationships. And so how did this total disaster take place? And I really sought to understand, and I also suffered from great depression. I mean, serious depression. And so I sought help from classes that I took, medications that I took. I read a lot of books. And I had grown up going to a Christian day school. My parents took me to church a lot, and then I raised my children the same way. And so my oldest son was about 21, and this was in 2015, when I talked to him on the phone one day, and he said he thought that he was not sure he believed God existed anymore. And this was really concerning to me. Number one, I have no excuse for this. This is just what I thought at the time. I just really liked being a person who was right. like being right, and being a know-it-all. And that's kind of how I saw religion at the time, is, being on the right side of things, being a know-it-all, having the best information. And here's my son falling off the deep end. And so I felt like this is something I must correct. And so I thought, okay, well, this is something I can deal with. I'm just going to educate him. And so I went to the Bible to try to read it and help him. And I realized I couldn't. And this was a red flag to me, because if I'm such a know-it-all, then why can't I open the Bible and use it in order to teach someone else? But the problem was that everything in it I had learned as secondhand information. You go to church, the pastor says, open it here, you read this. Open it here, I'll tell you what it means. And so was I really going to think that I was going to open the Bible and tell him what some pastor said from 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Where's the application in that? And it just wasn't personal information. I had never internalized any of it. It was all just, I was like a human encyclopedia, and there was no depth beyond that. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to solve this for myself. I'm just going to read it. I'll read it for myself, and then I'll be good. Well, I tried for about a week and gave up. And I'm an avid reader. I love reading. So that's not the problem. I've heard people say before, I don't like reading. Okay, well, that was not me. I love reading. I couldn't read it. It was boring. And I didn't understand it. Okay, so I put the Bible back on the shelf, and I thought, I guess my son's going to be an atheist, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I guess I'm just a Christian who's not going to be that informed. And I put my Bible back on the shelf, and I prayed, God, I guess if you want me to read it, you'll have to make me. I don't know what else to do. And I did not think about it more than that. And I barely remember what I'm telling you right now at all, because I think we all know that traumatic memories are kind of seared in our brain, whether in happy memories, right? But things we don't really care about, everyday ordinary events, they just fade away. And that's almost what this was. I cared so little that I barely remember this happening. And that's sad. I mean, I say it now as if this was a pivotal moment, and it was a pivotal moment. But I barely remember it, because then it had no significance to me at all. Months passed. And there was a lockdown at the prison. And this means we're all stuck in our rooms. Who knows why? And I had a bunch of library books, and I read through them all and ran out. And so I thought, well, how about the Bible? So I started reading the Bible, and I was shocked because it was the most interesting book I had ever read. Now, I live up in Minnesota, and I said that, and I grew up in a Baptist church, and up here in Minnesota in Baptist churches, especially, you know, in the 80s and 90s and stuff, we like to joke we're the frozen chosen. So we don't really believe in emotional things belonging in a church. We didn't discuss the Holy Spirit, who he was or what he did. And so I could not understand, and this was a radical shift. I mean, I was reading the Bible and it was like I had picked up Stephen King's greatest hits. I mean, yeah, Stephen or Dean Koontz, the best books they ever wrote.
Yes,
like I could not put it down. And I was speed reading through it. And I read it through lunch, through dinner, and I fell asleep like midnight with it in my hand. I woke up the next morning and I was like, that was super weird. But you know what? I bet that was just some random part of the Bible I never saw before. Because I was going to put this right. I'm going to put this right. There's nothing miraculous happening. My parents taught me that doesn't happen. The world did not fall off its axis yesterday. And so I'm going to read the Bible. I'm going to find those boring parts that I know are in there. All will be right with the world. And then I can forget about the Bible. This does not need to change my life. So I started again. And the same thing happened. I read it all day. And it was the most interesting book. I was captivated. And the third day I woke up and had a conversation with myself. Like, you reach a moment where you're either going to have your life changed. You're going to have to let it be changed, or you choose not to.
Right.
And what was happening was totally undeniable. And I knew it wasn't for me because I had tried to read this thing. I mean, this is like, I had tried, I'd failed. I didn't even want it. And now I could not put it down. And the thing is, the last 2 days, I had read good advice. And I thought to myself, if God can actually make me read this and love it, can he make me follow this advice? Because in it was advice that I had been trying to do all my life and failed, right? Manage money and things like that. And I had always tried to out earn my overspending, you know, engage in retail therapy, beat the bank with a paycheck, or bill paying, you know, borrow from Peter to pay Paul, and make sure nobody knows. Yeah. And so if I could actually manage money in these things, wouldn't that be a relief? What if I could really be successful? Because, you know, I think it's true that we can have this idea in our heads that you may like me, but if you knew what I know, the things I don't share, the things I'm hiding, maybe you wouldn't, right? And that's how we really manage our money, as opposed to what you think I'm doing with my money. And so I thought, I'm going to start trying some of these things. And so little by little, you know, I started reading the Bible and it started changing my life. And I will tell you about one of the most meaningful times. I got about halfway through the New Testament, and in the book of 1 Timothy, it said, he who fails to provide for his relatives is worse than an unbeliever because he has denied the faith and hasn't backed it up with fruit. And because I was still legally married, I was not obligated to pay child support. My wages were not garnished. But there were other women who had children that their wages were garnished, and they were making less than $1 an hour and living on like a quarter an hour because of garnishment of wages and fines and restitutions. But all my fines were paid off. I didn't owe child support, so I made my full paycheck. And I had 5 kids. Some of them only had 1, right? And so I was very convicted, but because of my son going into foster care and all of these other abuses my children were suffering, I become so depressed that my usually small self, my thin frame, I had begun to overeat. And so I was really overweight by this point. Really, I have pictures, you wouldn't recognize me. but I was very overweight. And so that was all fed with my paychecks. I was buying junk food on Canteen and just emotional eating.
Mm-hmm.
And I had tried to lose weight in the past couple of years, but I couldn't stop the emotional overeating. So I thought, well, I'm going to start garnishing my own paychecks and pay child support. But I wonder how long it will last before I cave and just buy junk food and go back to emotional eating. Because during this time, things with Tim and social services and him being in foster care had come to a head, and a trial had been set
Mm-hmm.
for my rights to be terminated and my husband's rights to be terminated. So just as my world was ultimately caving and burning all around me, I am trying to do things I've never done before, right? Like pay child support and manage money. And I just thought, I don't think it's possible. But I decided to obey God's word, and I thought, if you can make me read it, we'll just see what happens. So I set aside wages, and time went by, and I was able to do it. And I did not, I don't know why, make the connection between buying junk food and being overweight, or spending money on it and being overweight, right? But
Yeah.
as time passed, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, I began to become thin. And so the more I didn't exercise, I didn't diet, I just stopped buying junk food and started paying child support. And so that was extra motivation for me, an unexpected surprise, right? That God's giving me this ability. And I remember the first time I dropped my first child support check in the mail to my husband. I had not told him I was going to be doing this because we were not on speaking terms at this point at all. We had a very hateful relationship. And so the check was, I think, maybe $15, and that was like 2 months worth of garnishing my pay, 25% of my pay.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered, as I thought about dropping it in there, will he get this and then not even open it because he'll think there's a hate letter in there and he'll just toss it. And then I did all this suffering every night. I don't have my junk food anymore. I am starving and going through all this pain, and then he just tosses it and never even knows, because I still wanted to be congratulated. Congratulations, you're paying child support. You're saving this money. And then for no one to even know, and him just toss it. Or even worse, he gets it. He opens it. He sees how small it is, and he uses this money to make fun of me. Maybe he would show it to my kids and ridicule me. And then instead of praise, the opposite would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be seen as stupid and all the opposite of the things I wanted. And so I thought about that. And then I just mailed it. And I thought, I am accountable for my actions. I am not responsible for his response.
Right. Right.
And I mailed it. And I just kept mailing it, and I just kept mailing it, and I just kept mailing those checks. And so the next several years were filled with God teaching me that he can give me the ability to obey him, just like reading his word and sending those child support checks, and right up through the termination of my parental rights with Tim. And so that by the time I left prison, I was a different person. When I was in prison, when I entered prison, I took so many medications for depression, it was higher than the recommended dosages to be healthy. The prison didn't even want to give me medications on dosages that high, but they did, because they tried to lower them, and I ended up in a padded room on suicide watch. So they put them back up where they belonged.
Right.
And when I started obeying God's word and making these changes that he allowed me to follow through on, after about a year and a half, and I did not correlate mental health with God, because I wasn't trying to follow God. I thought I was a Christian. I didn't know reading the Bible was a thing, so I did not have an agenda. God entered my room, caused me to read his word, to see these things, and then gave me the ability to follow through. So it was his agenda I was on. But after about a year and a half of life being so different, I remember thinking, I wonder if I need these medications anymore. And prior to going to prison, we would be poor at times and not have health insurance. So there'd be times I couldn't afford my medication, and that was a roller coaster, let me tell you. I could maybe fake stability for a month or two, but that's about the best that I could do. And it was extremely painful, like this, without it.
Oh, yeah.
And so, and I didn't like the side effects of medications. There were times I tried not to take it and just tried to go without, and I knew it was not possible in my own strength. But in the summer of 2017, I thought, I am going to stop taking the medication. I'm going to keep it though. I'm going to stop taking it and just see what happens. Just curious. I've never taken any since. That's the last time I took any of my antidepressant, antipsychotic, any of those medications. And I just kept waiting. And I just kept waiting. And I just kept waiting to be unstable, to be on an emotional roller coaster. I'm talking, I had been so depressed at times, I didn't shower for more than 6 months.
Oh,
I didn't
geez. Okay.
Yeah, I'm talking like comatose type depression. Not brushing my teeth for years, just catatonic type depression. And now I was flossing my teeth, not just brushing it, flossing it every day, nonstop, and making my bed every day. My room's perfect every day. And now I'm not on my meds, and I'm just waiting for this all to crash and burn. 3 months go by, 6 months go by, a year goes by, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 8 years. And so I am telling you, I am a walking, talking miracle. I am proof that God exists.
Yeah.
And that he does work personally in our lives. What impacted me most as I sat in my room in 2016, it wasn't me that wanted to read the Bible. I did not want to read the Bible. Was that God wanted me to read the Bible. And once that became clear to me on day 2 and then day 3, I have never felt more loved and more wanted in all my life, because God wanted me to read it, and he was making it obvious. That's what he wanted from me. And what else would he want but that I know him? He wasn't giving me the ability right at that moment to just do some good thing that would be good for me, or obey some command, or have some better day. What he wanted was for me to know him. I wrote my children thousands of pages of letters. Thousands of pages of letters when I was in prison over those 8 years. And while I wanted them to be good kids, of course I did, when it came to my relationship with them, I wanted to know them. I wanted their letters, and I wanted them to know me. Read my letters. That's a relationship. And so it was very obvious to me by this point that God didn't want a performance. He wanted a relationship.
Yes.
And that's so much more loving.
Yeah.
And so much more motivating, because up till this time, I think I've made it clear that I suffered such feelings of rejection that I had become angry and bitter, hateful. And this complete feeling of perfect love and permanent love allowed me then to let go of all of that and begin to show it to others. So
what you saying that right there, it jolted this this quote that I was reading, and I think it's perfect for what you just said. It said, live your life as if you're not being afraid of being hurt. Right? And what you just said right there with the letters, being in prison and developing that relationship with God. I think that's a perfect analogy, right? living your life as if, because you're already in prison, right? You know what I'm saying? You already watching your life fall apart. And, and I got another question after I say this, you know, when you begin to live your life in a way where you begin to trust and being vulnerable and coming from a place of rejection, there has to be a sense of being afraid that your children will reject you as well, because you're in prison and everything else, and they're having to survive in a world where one parent is away, the other parent is, pretty much abusing them, right? So the question would be, how did that relationship um, affect how you move from that point on?
Something that became very helpful to me, because I was often so frantic to help my children, and it's very helpless and powerless of a feeling in prison, right? When you can't just go and rescue. And so one thing that was so amazing to me is I began to realize I had always viewed God as a spectator or an observer of life, not someone with a direct involvement in an activity. As I read the Bible, I began to realize that he is intimately involved and active constantly, right? And so that was very interesting to me, and that he's very powerful. I mean, if I could have called up the president of the United States and gotten his commitment to direct involvement, I'd have felt pleased.
Right.
And yet here I didn't realize the creator of the universe is available. And something else, there were times when I couldn't talk to my children for a year or more. I haven't talked to my daughter since 2015. I don't even know where she is. And yet God is in the room with her right now as we speak. God is in the same room as she is. And so I can talk to God about her. And while I'm doing that, he is in the room with her. And so that is a direct and immediate connection anytime that I want. And God is my friend, right? He is my personal ally. And so I can co-parent with him. Someone who, the Bible is very clear, cares about my personal good and hers. And I can talk to the person who's right next to her anytime I want about her and her good. And so that became a great comfort to me, and a relief. I began to feel less out of control as a parent, and I began to feel more powerful as a parent.
Now, I have to ask, because I'm always curious, right? I talk about when I went to prison. And I know that when we were in there were some things, like charges, that if you came in there with it, you were definitely something bad was going to happen. And you understand, when it comes down to prison, there's politics and things in there, right? And we always had a rule, like if someone came in and we knew what sort of paperwork that they had, that opened up the doors for you either have a semi less stressful time in prison or a very, very bad time in prison. And that was going to be very short lived. So when it comes down to politics, when it comes down to the women's side of things, those rules still apply? Because, with you, and having to develop, not having the opportunity to develop a relationship with God while you're in there, did the situation change or anything like that? Because you said that you've had some hard times in there.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I can only speak to the prison I was at. Maybe other women's prisons are different. But there wasn't violence. Women tend to be catty,
Okay.
the Mean Girls type of movie, right? They're going to talk about you. You're going to be ostracized, right? But not necessarily physical violence. I never I don't think really any women in Shakopee, I shouldn't speak for other women. I never felt physically threatened in any way. I never felt unsafe. However, I did notice that, when I should say too, there's a big population difference between the women and the men. At a men's prison, about 25 to 30% of them will have a sex charge or a sex crime. While at Shakopee, there was about 700 women and only 12 of them had a sex charge.
Wow.
So a drastic difference. And a lot of them, it was, they happened to be charged along with a man, and the man actually committed the crime, right? But they were an aiding and abetting, bystanders. Yep. In any case, I noticed that those women didn't want anybody to know why they were there. Great fear, right? And just like you talked about, I've always been kind of a defiant individual. I remember my mom, I smoked before going to prison. My mom hated that, and they have a hobby farm. So she would say, well, you're going to have to walk the quarter mile to the street if that's where you're going to smoke. And I'd be like, that's fine, because that's where I'm going to smoke. You know, and it wasn't that I wanted to be obnoxious. It was that I felt like if I'm going to do something like that, I should suffer whatever consequences my choices bring.
Right.
And I believed that prison would be the nicest I was ever going to be treated for my charge. And that out of prison, people would really tell me what they think of me.
Right.
And that I deserved it. Maybe not everything, but I certainly was guilty of my charge. And I shouldn't hide from real hurt and real anger that people deserve to express. And so let's start now. Let's go. And so I just never hid my charge. And I remember the first time that there was any kind of experience related to that. It was at one of my first jobs. I think I had been in prison about a year. And you're supposed to be really quiet at this job. So it's a big room full of quiet people. And there was a girl who was just a known bully. And in front of the whole room, she decided to make a statement and start saying things to me about my charges. And if that room had been quiet before, you could have heard a pin drop at this point. All work stopped. And they were going to hear like this Mean Girls drop down. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And I just answered her, and she had most of the details of, well, she had all the details of my crime wrong. And when she realized that that was true, she got mad, right? And then the whole thing blowed over. And I thought, well, you know, I think this is just going to be a normal experience. And if I'm defensive, it makes me look like I'm defending my crime. Mm-hmm. And I don't ever want people to think that that's true. And I really shouldn't try to hide from the consequences of what I have caused. And if this is it, or if it's hurt or anger or whatever, I want to have a real response. Not one that looks like I am an angry or defensive person over something that was bad. So just bring it. Let me get used to it now. And I'm not prescribing that type of behavior for other people. I'm just explaining my own personality and how things worked out for me. So I was just pretty flagrant in, this is me. This is what my crime is. And I'm not proud of it, but I'm not going to hide it either, because whatever you're going to say what you want. And
right.
That's fine. Yeah.
We move on from there.
Yes.
Yeah, I love the fact of, you know, that you did say that and you put it out there and pretty much said, hey, you know, you either like it or you don't, but you know, this is what it is. And I also love the fact of that you actually use the word response, right? Which explains a lot. It definitely explains a lot, because when you can respond to things, it's more of a rational way. Whereas, you know, I've been in situations where I saw reaction, and it took me a long time to figure it out, but I was going, you know, reaction is more emotional. As you said, reaction, the defensive part, right? You know, if I react in a way where my emotions can make me appear bigger and more aggressive, then I have a chance of surviving. Whereas you're like, I'm going to respond. And instead of putting myself in a place of surviving, I'm accepting responsibility.
Yeah. And I wanted to. Yeah. I didn't think I fully knew how to accept responsibility, and I wanted to learn.
Okay.
And so, and I didn't fully know the consequences, and you're never going to learn them if you hide from them. If you hide who you are or what you did. And so I wanted to grow, and I for so many reasons. And, you know, after I started reading the Bible, something interesting happened. Up until then, I had been focused on, I want to make sure I have a good, positive experience in prison for myself. And sometimes that's, I need to get letters on my birthday, or I need to plan for my birthday or my holidays. So it's well buying things on Canteen. About this time, I started working as a tutor, an ABE tutor. And of course, everybody's having bad holidays, bad birthdays, and everything else. And so I read in the Bible that Jesus really talked a lot about loving others. And so I began to realize I have never had a good birthday here. I've never been able to do it. I've had 5 of them now, just not working out. I can make other people have a good birthday. We're allowed to mail cards. So I started buying on Canteen birthday cards in bulk, like 20 at a time. And then all of my students, we had these tablets, and it had like Google Calendar in there. I asked every single student, what's your birthday? Can I mail you a birthday card? They all said yes. And so I put Google reminders in there so that every year, like 3 weeks in advance, I would get a notification their birthday was coming up, and I'd mail them a birthday card every year. And I put Bible verses in it, and I would tell them good things about themselves that I actually knew because I knew them. And pretty soon I had in my tablet hundreds of people's birthdays, hundreds. After a couple of years, maybe almost 1,000. Some of them would leave and come back. Some of them left, and I never saw them again. Some of them, they left, they'd give me their address where they were going, and I'd mail it out to them, you know, keep going. And then I thought, why am I stopping at birthdays? Women would come in crying to class. And so then I started mailing out cards of, hey, I saw you were crying in class. I don't know why. I'm sorry to hear that, but you're not alone. And then girls would get in trouble and go to SEG, which is like a solitary confinement, you know, for discipline. And they'd get kicked out of class, and I'd start writing them letters when they were in SEG. So they'd feel encouraged to come back to class. And I didn't usually get any acknowledgement for any of this. People did, because I wrote everybody. I don't care how old you are. I don't care what color you are. I don't care where you come from. And I look like a soccer mom, right? So some of these girls were like, you want to do what? Why? But everyone wanted a card, right? And so after years of faithfully doing this, some women would come to me and go, you are the only person who has ever mailed me anything as long as I've been here. And you remember my birthday every year. And I say that to say that, again, now this is not necessarily prescriptive, but the more I read the Bible, the more I began to believe that following rules can be important, or should be important, like go the speed limit, right? And other things. And the prison had a lot of rules. So I decided I wanted to try to follow them. This was not a popular idea with people who don't want to follow them and think no one should. And so there were times when I was asked to break rules that I firmly said no. And then that's the times that I was threatened that I was going to get beat up, right? Violently. And by this point, other women would step in, leave her alone. She sent my mom a birthday card every week, or every year. She sends me a birthday card every year. There are Bible verses in it. She's just trying to live how she believes. That's a nice lady. Leave her alone. And so I did not expect that to happen at all, right? It wasn't intentional. It wasn't anything I expected, but that's what became my safety. That's what became my safety. So,
Okay. All right. Now, fast forwarding, because you you got to a point where you was going to court about ready to, what you were fighting for, to not lose your rights,
mhm.
right? And you end up losing them, correct?
Yeah.
And that was
Did.
that was a hell of a battle. You and I
Mhm.
talked about it, and I couldn't relate to what you were saying. I was just like, man, like it's like you was just in a different place than I was, right? And living totally different lives. But I definitely could understand that. Walk us through that journey, because I think at that you were trying to get your son, right? There was
Yes.
something that was going on with your son. Walk us through that part of your journey, your life.
Well, my son Tim um, had been in foster care for a couple of years, and so the social services had decided to terminate our parental rights.
Mhm.
And they told me if I could find a home for him in Minnesota, then I could keep my parental rights. And so I was very excited about that because I felt like this is the end. I'm going to get to see him soon. He's going to live in Minnesota. He's going to be out of foster care. And I was very happy. And so I made more phone calls than an Amway salesman. I called people I hadn't talked to in ages, and I just wasn't finding anyone who could take him. And so time is passing, and this was right at the same time as I'm starting to read the Bible and go through all these other things. And God is really starting to teach me his ways and how he does things in his power. And so it gets to be about May. And I was told this in January, which is when I started reading the Bible. And it gets to May. And I'm at this time pretty discouraged. I'm becoming more desperate in my prayer. It's been 5 months. I call people all the time, people I haven't seen since high school. No one's offering to take my son. And then I read in the Gospels where Jesus says, if anyone loves mother or brother or father or son more than me, they are not worthy of me. And I read that and I'm thinking, could this possibly be saying that God might terminate my rights and I have to choose, right? If there's a choice between my son or God, what is this saying? And I just cannot tell you. That was the first time that thought hit me. I rejected that thought with all of my being. But just it was I wanted to throw up on the spot. It was such an immediate hateful response to the idea. And I was screaming in my head, that cannot be what this means. Absolutely not. It can't be. We're on the same page here. We're fighting for justice. I'm going to keep my son. My son's coming here. All my dreams are coming true at once.
Mhm.
But now you're saying, no, that might not be it. No. And I'm just screaming in my head. And then I read in Proverbs 16:3. Roll your works upon the Lord, commit and trust them wholly to him. He will cause your thoughts to become agreeable to his will, and so shall your plans be established and succeed. And I thought, well, if God does mean to terminate my parental rights, well, then it's a good plan. The Bible says all his plans are good, and he must be excited about it. God must be excited about his plan, which means I'm on the wrong page. I
Mm.
want to be excited about good things. And so then I need him to cause my thoughts to become agreeable to his will. So then I just prayed, God, I cannot do it. There is nothing in me that would think of that as good. That's going to have to be all you. But if it is something that you want, then I will ask you to do it. So then all that summer, I kept calling people relentlessly. I was so obnoxious about it that I caused my oldest son to reject me and not want to talk to me anymore for over a year because I was so persistent, being so upset. And even my mom didn't want to talk to me for a while.
Wow.
And, but at the same time, God began to teach me then I thought of it this way. I'll give one analogy. I thought if I was going to go to the store, I would want to bring my kids because I like spending time with them. But if there was a fiery car crash in the future and I knew that, I wouldn't bring them, of course. Well, God does know the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so if he knew there was a fiery car crash, would tell me not to bring the kids. And I should not rebel against that. I should know he's saving their lives. I'm the one who doesn't know. He's the one that does. Right? So be thankful, be grateful, not upset. And so then I applied that to my situation. And if my rights are terminated, it's the fiery car crash, I should be thankful. So we get to September and my rights were terminated. And I had been told, if they were, that I would not be allowed to see or talk to my son again until he turned 18. And at the time, he was 13, just turning 14. And so my rights were terminated. And I was upset, but it wasn't the worst day ever. I felt at peace because I believed this must be the good plan. I just didn't know the future to. And I did fight that again all the way to the Supreme Court. That took another year. I lost in the Supreme Court. And then I had a year left to go before leaving prison. And the month before I was going to leave prison, I'm talking to my mom on the phone and she says, I just got a call. Timmy's about to be adopted. And he's living with a caseworker who's in charge of foster parents. And she wants to adopt him to get him out of the cycle of foster homes. And he doesn't want to be adopted. So they made an agreement. He would keep his last name. His mom could be his mom. His dad could be his dad. And in order to prove the commitment, he wants to talk to you right now. And so my mom gave me the phone number and I called. And I talked to his soon to be new adoptive mom. She was very respectful to me. I mean, I can't even imagine what her circumstances might have been like. She's adopting a boy and his mom's in prison and she's a sex offender. And she gets on the phone and she was so loving to me. She's like, you are his mom and you are still going to be his mom. And I'm just adopting him to rescue him from the situation that he's been in and we can co-parent. Oh, she was so nice. And then she put my son on the phone. And so when I got out of prison, she flew him out. I got out of prison just before Christmas and she flew him out to spend Christmas with me. And so none of the things I had been told would happen did happen. My son was returned to me and he did move in with me when he turned 18, came back to Minnesota and moved in. And so God was very good in restoring all of those things, you know, and it has been a very, very good and happy ending. You know, I got to live with Lucas and I got to live with Tim. I will tell you one more story. Not long after Tim moved in, when he was 18, I couldn't get a hold of my son, Tom. And Tom was the only one left now, still living out in Seattle by himself. And I couldn't get a hold of him, and I usually talk to him all the time. And so after a short bit of time, he texted me some cockamamie story about he was unavailable for who knows what reason. It's no big deal. Then he moved to California, just out of the blue. And then he told me he couldn't stay in California, so he moved to my house. So now Tom's living in my house. And I had not had an opportunity to spend much time with Tom. Tom is my third son, but I just love him. And I hadn't had much time to spend with him because he'd been out in Seattle most of this time. But here moves in Tom, and he's an alcoholic. He's got drug issues. His mental health is just like this. And so I'm not understanding what's going on. And I'm in bed one night, and Tom stumbles through the room on the way to the bathroom, and he's just so drunk. And Tom had moved into my house wearing a necklace that had a nail on it. And I had thought maybe this is a religious thing. Some people do that, you know, like a cross with the nail. So I thought maybe that's what his necklace meant. Anyways, he's throwing up over the toilet and he's drunk in the bathroom. It's the middle of the night. And he says, Mom, do you know why I wear this nail? I said, I don't. He says, you know, when I was out of touch a few months ago and you couldn't get a hold of me? I says, yeah. He says, I killed myself. What? He says, I committed suicide. He says, this nail I wear around my neck is the nail I used to hang myself.
Mm.
He says, I didn't want to live anymore. He said, Timmy had come to live here. Dad had fled the state, didn't live in Washington anymore, and Lucas had come to Minnesota, and I was all alone. And nobody needed me anymore. And I didn't want to live anymore. So I took this nail and I nailed it above a door frame and I pulled on it 4 times to make sure it would hold my weight. And then I researched how long it would take before rescue could arrive to make sure that it was so long that no one could rescue me, because I really wanted to be dead. And that he had a dog and a cat and he didn't want them left alone. And he knew that if he killed himself, it might be a week or more before anybody found him and his pets could be harmed. So he called the fire department and said, I'm going to kill myself, blah, blah, blah. And then he hung himself. And they did, in fact, get there to find him unresponsive, not breathing, no heartbeat, nothing. And they cut him down and managed to shock him back to life and resuscitate him. And so that's the nail that he wears around his neck. And he says, I wear it to remind me that God wants me here, that I'm not supposed to be dead. And so you talk about co-parenting and praying for your kids and having that opportunity to have them brought back to you and to be able to spend time with them. So Tom still lives with me. He's here still today, and he is doing better than ever. And just the opportunity to be on this journey with him and to love him through this time. I am so sorry for any harm that I caused him that led him on that journey. And I certainly don't deserve any opportunity to be involved in the healing that he needs to go through. But I am so grateful that I have been allowed the opportunity to participate in it.
Right.
And so,
I love that, because, and we'll get into the next part of it, because there's something else that I think will blow people's minds, right? You know what I'm saying? Talk about a true story. It reminds me of Joe, you know, in so many ways, except for, you know, the elimination of his family and things like that. But in the same sense, that's pretty much the path that you was on. You went through this journey. And I just want to, because we got some people tuning in over here on Instagram. So I just want to tell them, you know, thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comment section over there. We got some more people that tuned in from Instagram, my friend Zach. Zach, thank you for tuning in and everything. If you have any, and again, anybody who's tuning in, please put your questions and comments over there. And thank you for enjoying the conversation. It's still getting better. It's still getting really, really good. So now my question would to you, there's something else that happened as well, right? You know, your pen pal.
oh,
Yeah, see, there's that smile. There's that smile, because I think that right there is the icing on the cake, right? You know, ever since we talked the last time, I was like, man, you know, I spoke about it, but I didn't want to give too much away to anyone. And you know, some of the people I talk to are in the comments right now, and they're following along, and I'm just like, y'all have no idea. Like, this is gonna blow your mind, right? You know, let's get into that section about your pen pal, right?
okay.
I think
Yes.
that at the end there's a huge twist of a blessing that comes from
Yes. Yes. Well, while I was incarcerated, there were several times that my husband and I sent divorce paperwork back and forth, and we could never agree on anything. And so we didn't have a good relationship, but we were struggling to end it. I will admit, that part of the reason I didn't sign it at the time is I wanted to make sure to remain in full custody of my daughter and things. So it wasn't any goodwill on either one of our parts. We were just being manipulative. Well, when at the time of my release from prison, he sent texts to me and my children saying, if your mom doesn't file for divorce, I'm going to kill her. And he was very graphic about how that murder would take place and how much he was going to enjoy participating in that murder and stuff. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to file, going to pay right away. And so I did, and we became divorced. But in 2016, right after, or right when I was awaiting the trial of my parental rights, that summer, I got a letter out of the blue. And when you're a woman in prison, and maybe when you're a man, I don't know, we would occasionally get letters from incarcerated men, and they would be looking for pen pals. And so I got these letters every once in a while, and I never wrote back because I wrote my kids a lot. And it costs money to buy envelopes, paper, pens, and it's time to write. I'm not writing anybody but my kids, especially since technically I was still married. Okay, so I get this, but I would read them sometimes. Okay, I'm going to admit I read them because they were entertaining. I just didn't write back.
Understood. There's nothing like getting a letter from someone in there, right? You know, it can get pretty lonely when you're sitting back and lost in your own thoughts.
Yes.
In a space, a very confined space of you know.
So I read this one, and he said in it, by the way, I sent you a present. A present. You can't send something inmate to inmate. You can't even draw a picture and put it with your letter. So I thought, this guy's crazy, and I threw it away. Threw the whole letter away. I went to canteen that day. My canteen bag had $100 worth of extra stuff in it. And then I was like, oh, he's one of the guys that works at the canteen prison, and he filled my bag with extra stuff. That's the present. Well, I did not want him doing this again, because by this time I was convinced that now that I was down to 115 pounds, I was skinny, you know, and God had given me the ability to manage money. He was giving me the ability to not have to take depression medications anymore and all this stuff. I need God. I need God. I was picturing my life before God, my life after God. I didn't ever want to go back. And God did not approve of stealing. And so I ran right back to my room. I dug the letter out of the trash, and I said, listen, I got your letter. I got the canteen. You are naughty. Don't ever do that again. You're going to get me in trouble, you in trouble. God gives me everything I need, and here's where you can get a free Bible. And then I said, I'm never writing you again. I don't mean to be disrespectful. You know, good luck. And my dad was like, I bet he never showed that letter to his friends.
Understood.
Yeah. And then I put him on my prayer list, and I prayed for him for maybe a year, and then just kind of forgot about the whole thing. And I get out of prison, and I'm divorced and everything, and I'm working one day, and I kind of remembered that, and I thought, yeah, that was funny just how that happened, you know. And God said, hey, you could write him now. There's no integrity issue. You got time. And I thought about it, and when I was pretty sure that it would be an okay thing, I realized I don't even know his name. And so I told God, I'm driving home from work. I don't even know his initials. If you really want me to do this, you're going to have to tell me his name. And right then, a name came to my mind. And it wasn't some easy name like John Smith, right? It's a weird name. And I was like, okay, well, maybe that was just one of the many people that wrote me. So I go home to look it up, because you can look up people who are in prison by a name. It was a real person. It was a real name, but he was in the wrong prison. And so I was like, okay, maybe it's not the guy. But I'm going to admit that something else happened. So I had thought, because of being in prison, you know, and I had friends who had all sorts of serious levels of multiple murders and serious crimes. And they were friends with me and stuff. You know, the Bible talks about not judging people, right? And loving everyone. And so I thought that that was one sin I wasn't guilty of, was judging by appearances. And I probably had pride about that. And God was right now going to teach me. I had not learned that lesson at all. So I will take us back to, I remember being in sex offender treatment at prison. And this was way back at the beginning of my stay. And we were all having a talk and how we're supposed to, when you're dating someone, you're supposed to tell them that you have been charged with a crime. And one girl's like, yeah, I can just imagine how this conversation will go. You tell them I'm a sex offender and they're like, yeah, what a coincidence. Me too. And we were all like, oh, that'd be a horrible conversation.
Oh my God.
It's okay for me, not you.
Oh,
and
man.
so I was about to have that moment. God was going to play a big joke on me right now. I open up my internet browser and look at his name. And I swear to God, he had the same charge as me. Not the same crime, but the same charge. And here's, women are non-threatening. They can look very non-threatening, right? And men, just by default, to a woman anyways, they can look bigger, they can look aggressive, just even at face value. And so I saw a picture of a man, a big man, and then I saw his crime was a sex charge, and I was like, ah! Click, and I just shut that computer off. I was like, that was funny, God. That was funny. You gave me his name and everything. I was like thinking about that all day at work. No, no. And so I just shut that whole line of thinking down. Not talking to him, not doing that. And I went to bed. And the next day I went to work, and all day I'm at work, and God's like, yeah, so what about that thing yesterday? And I was like, And God was like, yeah, but I like gave you his name and everything, like as soon as you asked. I was like, yeah, that was really cool. No. And God was like, if you don't talk to him and you love me and you talk about me all the time, if you don't talk to him about God, who will?
Mhm.
I was like, okay, all right, you got me there. So I said, you know what? Maybe it ain't even the guy. He was in the wrong prison. So I comforted myself with that. So I went back home, I opened up the browser, and I emailed him. And I said, so I think I got out, I was in prison, and I think you sent me a letter. I'm not sure you're the person I'm thinking of. If you are, you did something for me, and I told you never do it again. Can you tell me what it was? And he's like, yeah, I remember you, Holly. I sent you canteen. I was like, it's the guy. And so then I thought, oh no, well, what if he thinks, great, this Jesus freak is bothering me again? I thought, I don't want to be disrespectful. And so I asked him, I said, do you want to keep in touch? I'm out of prison now, and I'd be okay with that. And he said, I would like that. So I let him email me, and we emailed each other back and forth. And then I let him call me. And at the same time, a lady at church had given me a book on how God is our Father and what God thinks of fatherhood. And I was reading this, and Corbin, that's his name, Corbin kept telling me how he had never known his father, never met him, anything. And he kept mentioning his father. And so I got this idea his father is very important to him. And Father's Day was coming up in June. So one day I asked him, I said, would you like me to find your father? Oh, well, my family, they have looked and looked for years. No one can find him. I said, well, here's what I think. God thinks fathers are very important, and he wants to show you that he thinks it's important to you. He wants me to look for your father. Okay, well, I don't think you're going to find him. So 3 days later, I found his father. And here's what was really interesting. My dad has 7 brothers, and one of them lived in a tiny town in Alaska of about 6,000 people. Alaska is huge. There's 5 time zones in that state. Corbin's dad was his neighbor. I said, Corbin, of all the women you could have randomly chosen to write a pen pal letter to in 2016, you chose a woman who was going to pray for you for a year, who was going to get out of prison, and God was going to tell you your name again. and then who's going to tell you and remind you about God. Find your dad in 3 days, and your dad is her uncle's neighbor. It doesn't get more personal and more specific than that. God is trying to make an impression on you too, that you matter, but he's doing it in a different way. He's showing you the things that you care about.
Mm-hmm.
And so, needless to say, Corbin and I became very good friends, close friends, and then we began dating, and we were married last May. So this May will be our first wedding anniversary and the 5th anniversary of us talking for the first time since I got out of prison.
See, your testimony is strong, very, very strong. And it's inspiring because you can come from a place, and I know a lot of guys who have, got those charges and in a lot of cases wrongfully, right? You know what I'm saying? Peeing in public or something like that, but the laws have changed. And that's what they used to do. So you had to be really careful, right? Especially, you just never knew. And I have a friend. He was a sex trafficking victim, and he's a huge advocate of shedding light on the misconceptions and things like that. And you're talking about redemption and God's love, and and how that works, because God works in mysterious ways, right? He has a strange way of saying, "Hey, no judgment, nothing but love, and I'm going to use you in a way that's going to help change other people's lives." Now, which leads us to the work that you do and the podcast that you have.
Yeah.
Let's talk about let's shed a little light on that.
Well, I have a podcast and blog called From Surviving to Living, and I'm chronicling my journey through the prison system, a lot of what we have talked about here today. The blog is really a book, but it's in blog post format, so chapter per blog post. And then the podcast is using the blog as content inspiration. So it's a serialized audiobook. And it has been such a joy because I really think that every episode of the podcast needs to be, I think, a delight to listen to. And it needs also to be worship. It needs to not, it shouldn't be about Holly and Holly's journey. It should be, this is why we need to worship God. And it should really be a time of worship. And it should end with inspiration to worship him and seek him in your own life. Right. So that's the goal of each podcast episode. And it should be each episode is a journey in itself. I will never put myself on the same plane as these people, but I always loved Steven Spielberg and the emotional journeys that he brings people on. When you go to Spielberg's movies, you have set expectations, but every movie is its own odyssey.
Right.
And I view each one of my podcast episodes in the same way. You should have a certain set of expectations. I'm going to meet them, but each episode is its own odyssey, and I bring fun new things to each one. Recently, I found the opportunity to grow the podcast into a hybrid version in a TV studio. And so I'm going to be introducing guests, and God has just opened doors. I've been connected to Steve Johnson, who is a multiple Emmy award-winning director and producer, and going to be able to learn from him. And I'm excited to do that. He has a prison ministry at Shakopee Prison. And so such a great networking connection. And he has formed Five Stone Media, which has the goal of telling transformational stories as well. So I'm so grateful that he's willing to provide any input or mentoring for my podcast and what I'm doing. It's certainly not based on my own merit. That was a connection I never saw coming and that God wants for himself. And so I just see a lot of exciting things coming, and I really hope that it encourages people, because I am not special. I am not unique at all. And I did not plan a journey with an agenda and then set out to accomplish it. That's not what happened. And so this is what God has done for himself. And the Bible clearly states this is what God desires to do for all of us. So then we can all feel excited at that and start today.
I love that. I definitely love that. Holly, thank you. Thank you for sharing such a strong, powerful testimony. Now, where can people find your podcast? Is it on YouTube? Is it on all the podcast platforms?
Yes. So if you go to my website, hollybot.me, which is just my name, .me, then I have on there all of the platforms that it's streaming from, which is like 20 different platforms, SoundCloud and YouTube and Spotify and iTunes and you name it. But it's also streaming from my own website and blog, and you can just listen to it right there if you want to.
Nice. Now, other than the podcast, where can people find you?
I think once I have the interview, TV studio interview, hybrid part of the podcast going, I will also be on cable TV. And so if you want, since you won't be local, or not all of our audience will be local, you can find that online at speakminneapolis.com. And they stream all of their content from their website there. So you'll be able to find those there as well.
Nice. Now, I always ask my guests this before we end. If you had any words to give anyone out there right now, what would you leave them with?
I think the most important thing to do is, if all of this sounds overwhelming and you're not sure where to start, the Bible is not fun to read for you. And prayer sounds difficult or overwhelming, then start by asking the person who wants you to do all these things to make you want to. God, make me want to pray, make me want to read your word. And I think that's the best way to start all of this journey, knowing it's not within you and giving it to the person who can do all things.
That was so powerful. Holly, thank you. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing your story with my audience and myself. And it's just like the first time, it fills my heart. It makes me smile to know that there is, redemption for people. There is, a chance to be forgiveness or be forgave. And there's a life out there that can be so much better than the one that you have if you trust you ask. And I know I have a very mixed audience, so and I often tell them, like, hey, maybe what I believe in or what someone else believes in may not be for you, but choose something that makes you a better human being and makes you want to go out into this world and leave such a positive impact on others. And stick with that. And if you don't have that, it's okay to grab onto someone else's faith until you're able to develop your own. As long as it gives you strength to get through your bad days.
Yeah.
And so with that being said, again, thank you for being on the show. For everyone else, if you guys have made it through, thank you guys for tuning in. And if you haven't already, do me a favor, head over to the YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time we drop a new episode. And also, do me a favor, head over to Holly's podcast, check out her website, give her a subscribe, check out her blog posts, get inspired, but also, make sure that you guys are taking this in and developing your sense of strength as you go through life. Life can be challenging. but it's honest. It's very, very honest. And now, with that being said, this is going to conclude this episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. Thank you guys always for tuning in and sharing so much with us. And until next time, you guys keep your head up. We'll see you in the next episode. Peace.